Hey there, how there, ho there, it's Jeff Cutter Diamond welcoming you to yet another Cutter Top 10 sports video, and we're doing the NFL this time. Open wide for some football, and we will open wide to some NFL draft videos. First one I would like to do is the top 10 NFL number one draft picks ever. So everyone knows about how, you have draft busts and draft steals, but I want to tell you about the number ones that, are one of the best number one draft picks around. And all that. So I actually have to rank these, if you will, and it's not going to be easy because there's 10 legendary players. So let me try. All right, number 10 on the list is Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck came in as the pivot from the University of Stanford to the Indianapolis Colts in 2012. The Colts had a problem. The previous year, Peyton Manning suffered a neck injury during preseason, and he couldn't play in the 2011 season. The Colts tried at different people at pivot, but failed miserably, so they had the number one draft pick. And because they had the number one draft pick, they figured that they might as well just pick a quarterback and then send Peyton Manning on his merry way because they were worried about if his injuries were career threatening. However, Peyton proved them wrong. Once he went to Denver, he actually led them to a pair of Super Bowl appearances, including Super Bowl 50 title. Andrew Luck was pretty good, and then all of a sudden, out of freaking nowhere, what was it, 2019 or all that? He actually quit playing in the middle of a preseason game. He just retired, and the fans booed him mercilessly. The Colts have had several chances to have a good starting quarterback, but they have failed miserably and all that. In fact, it's so bad at quarterback. Philip Rivers, 44 years old, is back at pivot for the Colts. So, anyway, number 9 is Myles Garrett, the best defensive player to be picked number 1 overall. But Myles Garrett was a pretty good player and all that. He is a pretty good player for the Cleveland Browns because Cleveland needs a guy who will have played well and given Cleveland some warmth. His 100 plus sacks are amazing as a number one draft pick. He had that season in which he actually suspended for the rest of the season due to throwing a helmet at a defensive player. Other than that, he's been very damn good. All that. Also, a good defensive player is number 8, Bruce Smith. There was a Bruce Smith, legendary Bruce Smith, that won the Heisman, but that was in 1940 from Minnesota. This is a different one. This is Bruce Smith from, I think, Virginia Tech. Number one draft pick in the year of my birth, 1985, to the Buffalo Bills, who needed something to fix their franchise, and Bruce Smith was it. Little did people know that Bruce Smith was going to be the all-time sacks leader in history. I think he still is, or someone passed him. I think he's number 1. That's probably it. This might be controversial, but number 7 is Michael Vick. The reason why I put Michael Vick at number 7 is his career was not as long as the other 6 guys on this list. And the fact of the matter was his going to prison for the dogfighting ring really ruined him. Michael Vick was this great elusive quarterback from Virginia Tech. He was pretty good, and Tech loved him. He led Tech to the BCS title game in 2000, and the number 1 pick went to the Falcons. Well, it would have went to the Chargers, but they traded that in a Tim Dwight deal. Well, the number 1 picks were swapped. San Diego got LT, LaDainian Tomlinson, and that worked. But it also worked for Atlanta because Michael Vick was their star quarterback. He was such a good player that in Madden 2004, he had a very high elusive rating. Michael Vick was unstoppable in 2004. Once you had him and once you knew you had to use him, then he was unstoppable. But, one man doesn't make a team. He was on the cover of Madden, and then he had the injuries. It was not his arrest that happened after the Madden cover. Well, later on, but not immediately. Michael Vick was good, and then he was charged with bankrolling a dogfighting operation. He served a couple years in prison, and then controversially in 2010, he was allowed back into the NFL and played for the Eagles. Everyone did not want Michael Vick back because of his crimes and all that. And I mean, it's understandable. He did have a few years where he was decent, but after that, 2013, I think he retired. Number six. Okay, number 6 is Joe Burrow. Now he will have more time to gel because this guy's only been around for 5 years. But Joe Burrow, to me, has been the ray of sunshine that Cincy needs. Carson Palmer kept getting hurt. Boomer Esiason can lead them to the promised land now that Ken Anderson. But I think Joe Burrow is a legendary pivot for the Bengals when he's healthy. Yeah, when he's healthy, the Bengals are quite good. When he's not healthy, excuse me, that happens. But anyway, Joe Burrow is a pretty good pivot and all that. And the Bengals knew it. Well, he did win the Heisman Trophy and lead LSU to the national title. And did throw a lot of touchdown passes, which was unusual for Southeastern Conference quarterbacks. But yeah, Joe Burrow knew what he had to do, and he did it. All right, this might be controversial, but I'm going with this. Number 5 is Eli Manning. Personally, to me, Eli is a pretty good quarterback for the Giants. Well, of course, there was controversy in 2004. When first overall, the Chargers had the number 1 pick. So they were hoping to get Eli Manning, get San Diego some pivot help. But all this, well, Drew Brees was there, but they wanted to get help for Brees. Well, that didn't work out so well. Eli said he didn't want to go to San Diego because he couldn't think of anything good about that city. Him and his father, Archie Manning, the great Archie Manning, said no. So Eli basically forced a trade. The Chargers traded him to the Giants. The Giants picked up Phil Rivers. And it worked out for the Chargers. Philip Rivers was the confident passer for the Chargers. He supplanted Drew Brees, who went to New Orleans and woke up that franchise. And Eli woke up the Giants franchise with his passing. And 2 Super Bowls against the Patriots. Which, of course, pissed me off, of course, as a Patriots fan. But the fact of the matter is that Eli did win a couple of Super Bowls. His stats are not mind blowing, but they're pretty good. Number 4 is Troy Aikman. We're gonna go number 4, Troy Aikman. Troy Aikman was a great quarterback. He played 1 year for Oklahoma, did not like the system, and then switched to UCLA, which really isn't really much of a quarterback factory. But the fact of the matter is that Troy became the number 1 pick in a very top heavy top 5 in 1989. You had the Sanders, Dion, and Barry. No relation. You also had, I am blanking here, well, Tony Mandarich. But who else was in the top 5? I can't remember. They'll get to me, but nevertheless, Troy Aikman was the pivot for Dallas for the future. He didn't even win 1 game in his rookie campaign. The 1989 Cowboys only won 1 game, and he was in the pivot. It was Steve Walsh, who Jimmy Johnson took in a supplemental draft because he knew Steve Walsh from University of Miami. So Aikman did take some time to blossom, but by 1993 he had a Super Bowl ring, crushing Buffalo. He would do that the next year. Aikman was decent for Dallas and all that. He wasn't really the pass-heavy guy like Brett Favre was, but he could do well. And with him being a triplet alongside Emmitt Smith and Michael Irvin, Dallas knew what to do for the future. Too bad his career had to be cut short because of concussions. Yeah. Number 3. Yeah. Top 3 is also hard. Number 3 is Terry Bradshaw. Reason being is the other two quarterbacks on this list did go out with a bang. But I think Terry Bradshaw was a good number 1 pick, but not number 1 overall. Terry Bradshaw came from the University of Louisiana Tech, and Pittsburgh were struggling. People forget about how bad Pittsburgh was in the pre 1970. They were callous. They could only have won one playoff game. They were as bad as the Cardinals franchise was. Pittsburgh wasn't the model of excellence 55 years ago that they were today. So yeah, Terry Bradshaw was a good pivot for the Steelers, and they needed him. And it worked. Pittsburgh won 4 Super Bowls under his tenure, alongside Franco Harris and John Stallworth and Lynn Swann, among others. But Terry Bradshaw was pretty attractive when he had to be. Sure, he was balding and all that, but yeah, he had the steel curtain eating out of his hand and only played for one team in his career. Think about that. Number 2 is Peyton. Number 2 is Peyton Manning. I know it's controversial, but I had to go with Peyton Manning, number 2. Peyton was a good quarterback for the University of Tennessee. He actually balked at his father's tenure at Ole Miss. Like he decided to go to another school to make his legacy and not be in the shadow of his father. I wish Eli did that, but he led Ole Miss well. Peyton led Tennessee to prominence. Unfortunately, the next year, Tennessee, the year he was drafted, Tennessee did put it all together and won the national title. But anyhow, Peyton was picked number 1 in that famous 1998 draft. It was either him or Ryan Leaf who were going to be number 1. And they picked Peyton. The Colts took Peyton. San Diego took Ryan Leaf. It actually worked out for a few games. Leaf won the first 2 games of his career. Peyton was terrible. But Ryan Leaf started to go ballistic after a 1 for 15 performance against the Chiefs. You basically told the reporter, "Don't fuck with me. Knock it off." Yes, Peyton in his first season sucked. He was 3-13, but Peyton would be big, and the Colts were sowing the seeds to make things better. Reggie Wayne came into the system. Marvin Harrison came into the system. Edgerrin James came in the system. It all worked. Peyton was a good quarterback. He just couldn't get past Tom Brady when he needed to. Unfortunately for the doubters, Peyton would win a Super Bowl in 2007. He was fine until that neck injury, which I talked about when I talked about Andrew Luck. Peyton Manning was a good quarterback, and Denver took him. Although he would be in the shadow of John Elway, Peyton Manning did his job. He led the Broncos to 2 Super Bowls, winning one of them. But hey, he retired on top, and that's a good factor. And finally, number 1 is the guy I just mentioned, John Elway, 1983. I think John Elway definitely is number 1. Reason being, he played for one team his whole career. He pivoted quite well, and fans loved him. John Elway was a standout for the University of Stanford, and in 1983, the Baltimore Colts had the number 1 pick, took John Elway. One problem, Elway didn't want to play for Baltimore. He knew that there were many factors. Baltimore's franchise was being run in the ground. It was a matter of time before Robert Irsay moved the Colts out of Baltimore. And in a fact that gets often overlooked, John Elway didn't like Frank Kush, the coach of the Colts, because Frank Kush came from Arizona State and he was known as a disciplinarian. So much so that Arizona State, after they fired him in 1979, took his name off all the record books and all that. He did get a redemption in 1996, getting the field named after him from the Sun Devils. But you know, John Elway did not want to fit in Frank Kush's system because, Kush was from Arizona State and John was from Stanford. He decided to leverage his New York Yankees career as a minor league baseball player. Colts had no choice. They traded him to Denver for a quarterback, Mark Herman, offensive lineman Chris Hinton, and other people and other cash. Unfortunately, Baltimore, that would be last year. Baltimore had the Colts, and then they moved to Indianapolis, and then the Ravens moved in 1996. But anyway, John Elway was good. He was very good. He got to 3 Super Bowls, 1987, 1989, and 1990 with the Broncos. sorry, 87, 88, 90. The first two were famous for their AFC title in the AFC title game like plays. You had the drive, which the Browns were up 20-13. They got the ball down to the 2 yard line for Denver, so they had to go 98 yards for the tie, and they did it. Elway the Jackson, 50 seconds left, tied the game. Rich Carlos kicks the barefooted field goal through the goalpost, but they lose to the Giants. And then the next year was known as the fumble, when Ernest Biner was getting to the end zone, but he fumbled, and Randy Lilly got the ball in the end zone for Denver. So anyway, it worked out, but unfortunately, Doug Williams and the Washington Redskins blitzed them, and then came 1990 being blown out 55-10 by the Niners. Elway just didn't have what it takes to win a Super Bowl. At least he made 3 of them. But the Broncos changed all their fortunes in 1997-98. Came out of with the wild card because Kansas City won the division. People forget about that. And then he led the Broncos over the Packers in the Super Bowl. Finally, and he went and Pat Bowlen saying, "This one's for John." And then came the next season, when the Broncos started out 13-0, John Elway was just as good as ever, and he beat the Falcons in the Super Bowl and retired on top. He rode off in the sunset. That's just how I feel. He's number 1 in my books. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond. Adieu.